In this video, we are going to look at Israel's Yom Kippur War of 1973, one of the most dramatic wars of Israel's history. We are also going to see how the war brings a prophetic warning for the future from a biblical perspective. So let's go into the story. War was brewing in early 1973. The Egyptian army, by the time October came, was in full battle array on the Suez Canal, on their side of the Suez, and on the opposing side was the Israeli forces. There was 100,000 troops ready to cross over the Suez Canal, with 1,350 tanks and 2,000 artillery pieces ready to cross. With this dramatic build-up that had happened on the Egyptian side, you would expect the Israelis to be just as ready on their side. But no. Israel had 450 reserve troops, aging troops, older generation troops who were definitely not the best troops Israel had to offer. Some of them came with their fishing gear. They were ready for a holiday at the Suez Canal to go fishing. So Israel was not prepared for the conflict which was ahead. Israel had 44 artillery pieces and only 3 tanks in the area. They were outnumbered. Absolutely outnumbered. The Syrian border with Israel was in even worse shape than the Egyptian border. So the October 5th, 1973, Israel was caught napping. The Israeli intelligence, which usually has been so superior, was totally blindsided by what was happening. They were assuming that the Arabs would not dare to attack Israel. Only a small number of reservists were mobilized in addition to those who always were on duty, just before the war broke out. After the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel felt invincible. They assumed that the Arabs would not attack them again, and if they did, Israel would easily strike back. And this mentality had crept in, so therefore they were not studying the movements of the enemy forces as carefully as they should have. They were not aware that the enemy had modernized. They were not aware that the enemy now had a new fighting spirit. Israel was reliant on its almighty tank forces, and so it sent its tanks in to combat the onslaught from Egypt and from Syria. But now their tanks were taken down by brand new anti-tank weapons carried by Egyptian and Syrian infantry. Israel was stunned, and the tanks were disabled one by one on the battlefront. Israel's air force was also incapacitated by the powerful Russian anti-air defenses, which had been provided to Egypt and Syria and brought to the front lines, protecting the incoming troops that were invading Israel. 1/3 of the Israeli air force was lost in the fighting. Egypt and Syria swarm Israel. Within 24 hours, Egypt's 100,000 men have crossed across the Suez Canal. The Syrians, meanwhile, launched the largest tank battle in history, 1,300 tanks against Israel's inferior 177 tanks. So the Syrian tanks, they had night vision, they could see in the dark. The Israeli tanks did not have this, and so they really had a disadvantage as the Syrian tanks were coming in. They could not see where the Syrian tanks could see them. It was in particular on the front with Syria that Israel faced the greatest danger, because they had no room to withdraw. If the Syrian tanks were able to cross the Israeli line, they would head down into civilian areas of the Galilee. There'd be an open path all the way to Haifa. Israel was in great, great danger. Israel's leaders were in panic. Golda Meir, the rock-solid, battle-hardy Prime Minister of Israel, got herself ready in case she had to commit suicide in the event of Israel losing the war. Israel's defense minister and war hero Moshe Dayan, seen here with the eye patch, was despairing over what he called the loss of the Third Temple. What he meant by this was the loss of the state of Israel, that it was going to be lost and gone forever. The Samson plan was considered, which is to bring out Israel's reported nuclear weapons. And if Israel was going to be destroyed, they'd make sure that their enemies would be destroyed with them. So Israel's leaders were in panic. However, there were heroes on the battlefront. One was a soldier named Zvika Goldberg. Zvika was a 21-year-old commander who went out into action, and he took out 6 tanks in quick succession. As darkness fell, this is on the Syrian border, Zvika lost radio contact with the only other Israeli tank in the area, and he was left completely alone when he faced the approaching 452nd Syrian Tank Battalion. Zvika kept dodging the enemy while shooting and moving, and this caused the Syrian forces to turn on their searchlights to try to find him, and it made it a lot easier for him to hit his targets. During that battle, Zvika took out 10 Syrian tanks and ultimately forced a Syrian withdrawal, as the Syrian tank commanders were convinced they had met a large Israeli force. Because he just kept moving position all the time, they thought there were multiple tanks coming against them. During that night, Zvika kept on fighting. He switched tanks 6 times throughout the night as each tank got damaged and people got injured around him. He himself got injured, his uniform caught on fire. But the injured hero kept on fighting for 20 hours straight before heading back to base, where he literally collapsed, unable to fight any longer. What a hero. What a hero. And Shmuel Ashkarov was another who showed the same spirit of a fighter. He destroyed 30 tanks while he was fighting, and he was injured and put into hospital. But he escaped the hospital in order to go back and keep on fighting. He was still in bandages, his vocal cords had been damaged, but he reassembled a tank battalion and kept on fighting in the critical hours and days ahead on the border with Syria. These heroes, who were without the support of the Israeli Air Force, who were fighting in very desperate situations that were chaotic, they really came up to the forefront, and they managed to save Israel at this critical time. Some Syrian tanks passed the lines of Israeli forces, yet for an unknown reason they stopped and didn't go any further. It was as if God himself was protecting the nation from destruction. But Israel lost 2,300 men in the war. It was one of Israel's costliest wars. As the war was intensifying and as Israel was retreating on both sides, as Israel was struggling to hold the line, a desperate plea was issued by Golda Meir to Richard Nixon. She called him at 3 a.m. The Americans had been hesitant about supporting Israel, about providing weapons to Israel. They had assumed that Israel would win again, and they had kept themselves out of direct involvement. But as the Soviets were resupplying the forces of Egypt and Syria, Golda Meir called out in desperation to Richard Nixon. Her phone call to him came at 3 a.m. and Richard remembered his mother's words. When he was a child, his mother was a Quaker Christian, and she had said to Richard that one day you'll find yourself in a position of power and the Jews will come to you asking for help. And when they do, make sure that you do whatever you can to help them. And so this morning, as he heard Golda Meir's desperate plea for supplies, calling him on the phone at 3 a.m., he remembered his mother's words. And he kicked the US State Department into action and launched an immediate and massive, urgent airlift to Israel. He knew that Israel needed it there and they needed it then. It's amazing that God had put this in the heart of Richard Nixon so many years earlier as a child. Here he was facing a corruption scandal, facing Watergate, yet he kicked into action at this critical time and helped to save Israel in this crucial hour. A future Yom Kippur War? Question mark. While Israel's army is one of the best, the message of 1973 is that Israel must remain on guard. She cannot get overconfident and believe in herself to the extent that she does not examine the build-up of enemy forces. This is a lesson for you and I as believers as well. Sometimes we have had tremendous victories and God has used us in amazing ways. And that's the very time when we can begin to get off guard. And we're not so worried about sin anymore, and we're not taking the precautions we used to take. And so the enemy builds up his attack and launches an attack on us. We have to remain on guard. We have an enemy, just like Israel has, that is out to destroy us and will get at us when we are not expecting it. Ezekiel the prophet foretells a future war when Israel will again be caught napping. This is in Ezekiel 38, verses 8 to 11, describing the Gog and Magog war and this massive storm cloud-like invasion of Israel from the north. And it describes them coming upon Israel having unwalled cities, Israel being unprepared for what is happening. So Israel will again be caught napping, but this time the invading force will be much larger than during the Yom Kippur War. This time Israel will be in utterly and totally desperate straits. So what's the answer to this future Yom Kippur War that Ezekiel foresaw? In this war, America, it will not be the answer. Help will not come from a Western nation coming to Israel's aid. Where will the help come from? Well, the Yom Kippur War of 73, I believe, gives us a prophetic picture of this future war. Because after all, it is the Day of Atonement, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, a day when all of Israel will fast and pray. Even Jews who are atheists, who are secular, who do not believe in God, will fast and pray on the Day of Atonement. Maybe they just want to be safe. But ultimately I believe that Yom Kippur is a picture of one day when the whole nation of Israel will cry out to God. The whole nation of Israel will fast and pray and saying, God, save us. We need your help. Like Golda Meir, they will call out. This time not to Richard Nixon, but they will call out to God himself saying, God, we need your help. The help will come as Israel fasts and prays. One day there is a greater war to come, but Israel will cry out to God and he will deliver her. Zechariah 14, I believe, describes this day. It says that then the Lord will go forth, and he will fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. He will return to Jerusalem. He will defend his people. So there is a future time coming, and I believe every year as Israel goes through Yom Kippur, as the whole nation is fasting and praying, this is a prophetic picture of this day which is to come. And every year as Israel goes through this day of fasting and prayer, they are also remembering the war that happened in 1973 and the tremendous suffering they went through at that time and how they narrowly escaped. And I believe both of these two events come together to form a prophetic picture and a prophetic message to Israel in the end times, that she needs to cry out to her God and he will save her, he will deliver her. He is the answer and no one else is. So I hope you've enjoyed this video about the Yom Kippur War, and for more videos like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel or go to the website www.pastorenoch.com.au. Thank you so much.